Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the MachineMetrics webinar series. Today's webinar is a live report on the state of the manufacturing industry, the impact of COVID-19 on manufacturing. Our agenda is pretty straightforward for today. We're going to start off with a brief introduction, introduce our panelists we're so thankful to have with us, and then get right into the live discussion. But before we get started, just a couple notes. Firstly, this webinar is being recorded, and all participants, registrants will get a link to the recording after the webinar is completed. Questions are indeed welcome. All you have to do is use the Q&A section in the Zoom navigation to ask a question anytime, and we'll do our best to get to as many of them as we can along the way. Before we get started, my name is Graham Nimmerman. I'm VP of Marketing at MachineMetrics, and I'll be your host and moderator. As the COVID-19 continues to spread, and our thoughts as a company and personally go out to anyone who has been infected or impacted by the virus. We hope you're all staying safe and taking all necessary precautions to keep it that way. For digital companies like us, the impact is significant but manageable. For manufacturing companies, this is less feasible, right? And we've, as a company, have spent the last days focused on ways that we can better help our customers and our community during this time. In any time of economic uncertainty, we believe that there's never been a more of an importance to stay well informed, so you can make smart personal and business decisions for the good of families and organizations, and that's exactly what we've focused on as a company. Our data science team has been refocusing their efforts on the impact of the virus on the industry. And we're making that data regularly available through our blog, machinemetrics.com/blog, and through our social media channels, with the goal of providing as many insights as we can to our community. Data is indeed power, and that power can help us stay informed about the right course of action instead of defaulting to either a fear or panic. That said, we are, as part of that greater learning and information, we're excited to be hosting what is the first of a number of free digital panels to discuss the impact of coronavirus on the manufacturing industry. We are fortunate to have an amazing group joining us today. Bill Berrien, CEO of Panelist Global Precision, Steve Klein, Chief Data Officer for Gartner Business Media, Bill Beither, co-founder and CEO of MachineMetrics, and Vicente Martinez, Electronics Laboratory Manager at Rossini Brakes. Thank you all for joining us today, and please feel free to just do a brief introduction. We're going to go around, and tell us a little bit about your business and how you are being impacted today by the crisis that we're all experiencing. Steve, care to take us through
Sure.
the introduction?
Yes, my name's Steve Klein. I'm the Chief Data Officer at Gartner Business Media and Gartner Intelligence. We're publishers of modern machine shop, production machining, mold making technology, and additive manufacturing, all in the sort of metalworking space, and then a number of others in durable goods manufacturing outside of that. I run our intelligence team, and we're doing all sorts of data research and custom survey work all around manufacturing. For us, we've all obviously gone work from home, which in our Cincinnati office is fairly unusual. For a third of our employees that are scattered all around the country, they all work from home. So we're all kind of like in this unusual space of dealing with each other in a different way. The good thing as a media company these days is that, we can work from home fairly easily. The biggest challenge will be if something were to happen to our printer or something that, right, they're in more like our readers, and that they're actually physically producing the magazine. So that gets to be a little challenging if we run into an issue there. But other than that, it kind of goes on business as normal as possible for us, even though we're just not in front of each other all the time.
Steve, thanks so much for the introduction. Hey, Bill Berrien, care to take the mic next?
Perfect. Thanks, Graham. Can you hear me okay? Great. Bill Berrien, CEO and owner of Pindell Global Precision. We're a contract manufacturer of precision machine parts located in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We have 2 facilities, about 75 employees, working 2 shifts. We serve a variety of industries, from automation, industrial controls, hydraulics, aerospace, high-end recreational. About 80% of our business, of our parts, are turned parts. The other 20% are milled. And our sort of motto is complex parts at medium volume. We're not great at prototype, and we're also not great at automotive high type of volumes. On the sort of threats to the business side, there's sort of 2 threats on the horizon. One is low oil prices, and the other is obviously COVID. Low oil prices we've seen before, so I won't go there. And the topic is COVID. Our situation here is we have not had anyone infected. This morning, as of 8 a.m., there's a governor-mandated safer at home directive, so all non-essential businesses are closed. We are considered essential, and we're abiding by all the precautions outlined in that safer at home initiative. So eliminating the choke points, no meetings, work from home wherever possible. But we are by the nature of it, a hands-on business. So while about 10-15% of the workforce, the team, can actually be working from home, the rest need to be here. So it's we take those precautions very seriously. But when you think about it, on any one shift, 30 to 35 people, over 90,000 square feet, it's sort of, in a way, sort of pick which 3,000 square feet you want to operate within. But to date, we aren't seeing the softness that you might expect with COVID and low oil prices. Nevertheless, with those threats, we are pulling our horns in. So hiring freeze, a deeper cost analysis, sort of a mandate for cash there, but also, a marketing pivot, and we can go into that in a little bit, as well as somewhat of a requoting push around parts that we've seen before that's being driven by a couple of different changes in our thought process.
Yeah, Bill, thanks for that. I'm really interested in learning more about, as a marketer, the marketing pivot. But I'm excited to get to that a little bit later. And Vicente, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you guys are managing right now.
Sure. Hey guys, my name is Vicente Martinez. I'm electronics laboratory manager for Racini at the facility at Puebla. Racini makes automotive components for a lot of clients across the world. We have facilities at Puebla, at Mexico, Piedras Negras at the north of Mexico, but also at Brazil, at the States, and we have some offices in Germany and in Japan. So our facility has around 1,500 people usually working across 3 shifts, and well, working so closely with the automotive industry basically shows us a big impact on sales. That was the first impact that we had because of COVID. The uncertainty is basically hitting all the consumers' projections, and that basically affects the sales that we can project or not. And that impacts also on what we can decide in terms of innovation that we had planned for this year. This basically put some pause on everything that we were doing. My job essentially is to lead those innovation projects. So that basically puts some pause a big percentage of my work. The other part is electronic repair. And there's an interesting point there in terms of production. Once machines stop working, all other components have a chance to fail. And that basically means more work to some of our people, because probably the inertia of machines working constantly. I mean, putting a stop to them usually feels in terms of electromechanical components that can get damaged. So we're actually experiencing a peak on the load of work that we have, and that can also mean, like this time of preventive maintenance that is being done to the machines. That is on production terms. Fortunately, we have been working extensively to automate most of our processes. So not really we need to adjust some inventories, we need to produce some parts during this week before shutting everything down. But we have around like 10% of the productive people that we usually have are the ones that are critical and that are working right there, right now. And I mean, fortunately, we have been working to automate those processes, but hearing from other plants and some peers here, not also at Puebla, but across Mexico, a lot of companies that did not have not only the automation for their processes, but also software platforms that allow them to plan their production, to change those requirements, to change all the logistics on their supply chain. They are struggling to adjust to these changes that are coming, and also in terms of like retrieving the data that their machines are what are their machines doing. They cannot know right now because they cannot have a lot of people investigating of those machines. A lot of people cannot be on the plant, and so they're experiencing a struggle to either keep producing, to shut everything down, or to readjust because they do not have the software infrastructure required to make that analysis as quick as they need it.
Interesting. Thank you for giving us that overview. Just kind of following, on with your thoughts. You talked about supply chain. Let's just kind of. I'd be really interested in hearing all of your thoughts on, the effects of this crisis on the current supply chain today, how you're seeing it either affect your business personally, or we're seeing it affect the industry as a whole, and even maybe taking a view on, how it may reorganize, the future of supply chain. Any thoughts along those lines? Maybe even starting with Vicente and working, the other way this time.
Sure. In terms of supply chain, for our core business, which is the foundry and the machining shop, right now it has not impacted that hard, because moving tons of metal usually just involves one transport person. It involves only like 2 or 3 people on our plant. But in terms of indirect old electronics, which can be like automation devices, like electronic components, that is being hit hard, because you start to reflect on how globalized and how international commerce is once you realize that you cannot import stuff either from Asia or from Europe, or maybe the people, your contacts on other continents from whom you were purchasing components, they are not even on the office. So in terms of supply chain, I think we're gonna experience scarcity eventually. That is going to come eventually. I mean, fortunately, we have stocks of like critical components, critical drives, critical, like even LCD screens. I'm actually experiencing some struggle because my LCD monitor broke when I was bringing it home, and I can't find some of the spare parts that I need to repair it. So, I mean, in terms of electronics, I'm pretty sure that we're going to experience problems with that. I hope that's not long lasting, but I'm sure that's going to bring more opportunities than it is bringing problems. But in terms of internal or national supply chain, that is not being affected that hard, at least not now, because But that's due to the government policies that have been lagging to implement. And it's more about the private initiative, the ones who are basically implementing these measures to stop the virus from spreading. But if you need to go out, you can do it. I mean, we do not have that government restrictions. Probably we should to avoid uh, spread of the virus, but it's more like a common sense arising from the people to stop moving around. So I think it's going to be something that will arise eventually.
Yeah, picking up on that, Bill, for your business, what is impact had today on supply chain, outlook, for obviously for today, but also looking into the future?
Honestly, Graham, on our supply chain, we really haven't seen an impact yet. Our primary inputs are the metal, the tooling, so sometimes the lubricant and such. And we have not seen that, but we have seen our customers' supply chains getting disrupted, and frankly, some opportunity there where overseas supply chain is disrupted to we see an opportunity to provide a domestic solution. So yes, nothing much on our supply chain, but we do see it downstream from us.
I find that really interesting, that notion of reorganization. It's something I'm hearing a bit of a theme across conversations I'm having from Japan to India to the United States. From that reorganizational side, starting with Steve, how do you think that reorg, will affect the kind of the world system, and what type of opportunities may exist in the future?
Yeah, so there's actually been a fair amount talked about that, obviously in the last couple of weeks. And I got a couple thoughts on the whole supply chain issue. One, if you read a lot from the investment community, right, which are giving money to all of the large OEMs around the world and the multinational companies, the expectation is that there is going to be a sort of reorganization of the supply chain, that in a way it got, however you want to term it, too thin, too fragile. I've seen an excellent sort of analogy for it of the manufacturing supply chain got to be very monoculture, whereas if you thought about Ireland, right, with the potato famine, where they got rid of all the kinds of potatoes except for one, and then a disease hits it, and now you lose all your potatoes. And this guy in the investment community was making, that's the sort of the way the manufacturing community has gotten, that we've gotten too concentrated in a particular area. And certainly, more people in the United States are outside of the manufacturing community are obviously waking up to that over the last couple weeks. But when you get into the sort of, in my world, the nitty gritty of manufacturing data, which to me is machine tool consumption, right? The base level of manufacturing technology that's needed to make anything almost a machine tool. If you look at the trends of that, Chinese machine tool consumption peaked in 2011 and has been virtually on a straight downward decline since then. Whereas last year in 2019, Chinese machine tool consumption contracted something like 15 or 16%. And their global share of machine tool consumption is as low as it's been since 2008. And that's happened pretty much similarly across the board in Asia. Whereas in the United States and Mexico, machine tool consumption in the United States last year was sort of flat. In Mexico, it was up 9 to 10%. Mexico had its highest share of global machine tool consumption ever last year, and the US had its highest share since 2001. So that trend of kind of reorganizing the supply chain, I think, has been ongoing for 6 or 7 years. I think this particular event and crisis is just making people even more aware and going to accelerate it. And then I would add one more thing on the short-term end of it is we are, in the data that we're doing and collecting, we have a survey out going to manufacturers like Bill's, tend to be smaller machining companies and smaller plastics processing companies. And there's relatively little disruption from what those companies are telling us to their supply chain. Very few have experienced changes from their suppliers, and only about 15% of them said they're adjusting their production and their capacity and dealing with other companies in the supply chain. So it's actually been kind of surprising so far that relatively little disruption in the actual manufacturing. It's all around the other things of staffing and budgets and contingency plans where we're seeing sort of more changes happening in the short term.
I love the concept of an accelerant, and we're seeing that across a number of industries. Even just in marketing, right? Events have been going digital for a long time, right? So, but an accelerant, right, is a great term to be using here. Bill Byford, speaking of data, MachineMetrics obviously in a unique position, right, to tell kind of a story on the impact of this virus in over time, in the near term, maybe even the long term. Tell us a bit about how you're leveraging data. What are you seeing, and what story is it telling?
Yeah, thanks, Graham. I think the best way to do that is actually to show you some of this data. So I'm going to go ahead and share a few slides here. First, I really wanted to kind of go over what actually where our customers are. We talk about hundreds of manufacturers in North America. We have there's an example of kind of the spread. This represents thousands of machines. Basically, the data set, is not a majority of machines by any means in the country or North America, but it's a representation that gives us a good idea of the industry as a whole. So this is actually was produced just today, and where some of you have been following my post on LinkedIn and our blog. So this has been evolving. Essentially, what we've seen is you could look at the left graph here. You have the solid blue line is what we're seeing this year. You have the red, which is 2018, the green 2019. So it provides a good comparison. And what you see is that we were pretty low in 2019. This kind of represents some of the other industry indexes like from Gartner and PMI. And then we started coming back towards the end of last year. That trend continued until really it was like around March 10th, I think. We'd already been hearing about the virus and a possible pandemic. And then from that point, we've seen, as you can see, a pretty steep drop. We even dropped, it leveled off a little bit, but it still went down even just yesterday. Over on the right here, you can see that drop. So we are seeing an impact on our customers from these shutdowns and from what I hear, it's not supply chain like what I'm hearing from you, Vicente and Bill. It's really some of these plants that are shutting down. So as we dive a little bit deeper, let's look at our industry distribution. By any means, for MachineMetrics, we have we're weighted in various industries. We're talking a bit about automotive, like Rossini, aerospace, and then a lot of contract manufacturers. A lot of these contract manufacturers do work in both these areas, but it's really hard to split them. Industrial machinery and equipment, medical device is a pretty big vertical for us, and then really others, other industries or those that are that were unspecified. Just to give you an idea of the landscape. This is really interesting to me because this is all those industries just looking at the last 30 days, what we're seeing. And what I see is, automotive, it is a small percentage of our customer base that are strictly automotive. It was like 6%, but you still see that drop off. And this corresponded to the shutdown of the large OEMs in North America. As far as I know, they're all shut down. And that happened, was it a week and a half ago? Last Thursday. Oh, so recent. And so this corresponds to that. And what's interesting to me is that the other industries are really holding their own. You don't see any significant drop-offs. You see there's a little bit here, but for the most part, they're really holding their own. So what we did is we started talking to our customers to kind of correlate to this data, just to really see what we're finding. And we've had some conversations really in the last few days, and we've been able to contact just over half of our customers and get some responses to what the status is. And what we've seen is that 80% of our customers are full production. I think that there's an uncertainty, but at least to date, they've not slowed down. And then 20% of those have been already impacted in some way. 12% have slowed down they've reduced their staff. Maybe they're running just one shift. They've thinned out their operators, or they're being impacted. I know that medical device, we kind of have both sides. We have those that are sort of involved in anything dealing with like ventilators or any like emergency services. They're producing more than they ever have. But then if you have elective surgeries, procedures, those medical companies are struggling. So there's really a divide there in medical. Oil and gas kind of has been taking a hit anyway, even prior to this. I think we're seeing some of that here. But then a lot of I think the shutdown is really in automotive right now. So that's in terms of the data that I have to share. That's really I'm happy to take questions, but that's kind of where we're coming from. And I don't have all the answers. I think our customers have more answers, which is why we invited Bill and Vicente here. And definitely interested to hear your thoughts on this. And if you want to reference this back, if you go to the blog post on MachineMetrics from yesterday, it's the same data, one day behind. You can dive into that a little bit deeper.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Bill. And obviously, we have a lot of people in the webinar currently watching this, and the questions are just like rolling in. So I promise I will do my best to get to all of them. I think we've got about 20 so far and coming in pretty constantly. So again, Bill, thank you for that overview. Really appreciate it. Bill Berrien, something that was brought up there, I'll just try to weave in some of these questions earlier than I initially expect, because I want to make sure to get to all of them. We kind of talked about essential business a little bit. Bill was, talking about the difference between certain medical, devices and others. What qualifies, your company, for example, as an essential business? How do you, and also just to kind of take a 2-for-1, because there are a lot of questions for you. Can you talk, how do you see the outlook for sales and demand over the next 6 to 12 months?
Good, Graham. So the essential business classification is actually something that cascades down from Department of Homeland Security, and it is companies. It is a fairly broad net, and I'll just say, I've looked at my sleeve of that, and it is companies that are involved in manufacturing components or equipment that go into electrical control systems and automation and lighting and everything there that number one keeps industry going to be able to react to COVID, and plus by extension you think of a future possibility of field hospitals and construction and things that you've seen over in Spain most recently and China in the past of just got to keep that industrial base oiled and primed for any sort of contingencies. Yeah, and so going back to demands and such, I mean it's really a wild card in terms of what we're going to see maybe 2 months out and beyond. Again, going back to original initial comments, you've got the oil and gas piece, which if you refer back to the 2015-2016 period, that was later called the industrial recession, which was little known, but we saw some of it, and somehow we have some correlation to oil and gas, even though we don't sell directly into that market. But that was you got a lot of correlation there with very low oil and gas prices, around $30-$35 a barrel that we're seeing here. COVID related, I mean it is a wild card. Is it going to be surges in ventilators and all sorts of other hospital equipment, or is there, sort of a medium industry pace that, everyone backs off their blankets or their ordering patterns and such, sort of across industry, and takes a little bit of a wait and see. So I honestly can't predict too far out in the future, and we're taking it as sort of a cautionary period. But I guess if you extrapolate that across everyone and it becomes cautionary, it becomes sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy that it is going to be, perhaps somewhat a little slower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. Thanks for that insight. And, it's interesting. This is something I've been thinking about, and clearly so of our audience today. I'm getting a lot of questions around, so how are those investments in Industry 4.0 paying off right now, right? The concept right around, striving towards automation, right, and driving opportunities to virtualize and improve, operations with data. As two manufacturers, obviously, in the heart of some facilities being just shut down mandated wise, and some, staying up and running, how are, these investments, at least in your experience in the industry, being leveraged and or kind of paying off during this time? And even more, how do you think future investments in automation technology will be either fueled or impacted by this time? Vicente, you want to start with this one, and I'll get back to Bill, and then I have a feeling everyone else would want to comment on this too.
Sure. Let me try to summarize this. Well, the first point is that 4.0 initiatives are definitely going to pay off during this time. I think there's a whole structure of how, depending on the type of initiative that you're working on, will eventually impact your business. I mean, even things like the obvious things are like remote collaboration tools, things that allow us to really work or really interact without having to attend the office. I mean, if you consider that 4.0, but I mean, that's in terms of the infrastructure that you need to really have 4.0 initiatives running right now. The other things are cloud computing and having a way to access your data, not only on your site. And that's something that I think that's important for Mexican companies. I think that Mexico has taken its time, at least in terms of medium companies, to really adopt cloud computing models. I think that from what some of our cloud providers have told us, I mean, big companies do have their cloud infrastructure, but a lot of small companies are not seeing that need for availability, for resilience, for data resilience, for analytics. And that's where probably a lot of companies weren't seeing that value. But right now, I mean, in a time in which you will eventually stop producing, it is a great time for companies to, we call this kind of like the hedgehog effect, in which you will basically close a little bit to the public, and you will start to analyze what you're doing. And fortunately for Racini, it is a good time to start analyzing what we have been retrieving from data from, for example, the MachineMetrics platform. And now we do have time to reflect on what we have been retrieving, the data that we have, to start probably running models, to start reflecting without that urgency that the production usually involves you into. It's basically like an industrial meditation. You have this data, but you didn't have the time to really sit and see what you were doing before and what you will do when production eventually starts over again. So I think that it is not only a good time to reflect on what initiatives you had, and because they will pay off, and I think they are already paying off, at least from our side. They are already giving us a lot to work on now that we needed to like press the pause button. But I think it is a good time to make some priorities on how you will continue to drive data from your machines, how you will continue to integrate those solutions that come from the production to your other systems, and how you will make them available for people that can see it on their desk, can see it on their houses, and really drive value from that data. And the rest is just the infrastructure to make that available. But I think that they will pay off, and that they are already paying off to the companies that took the time before this happened to drive data and eventually make that available to their people.
Yep. Now, thank you so much for that, Finn. That's very interesting. It's something, a trend I'm hearing a lot across the industry. Steve, as somebody who is talking to so much of the community constantly, I'd love to learn more about what you're hearing, through some of your survey data, from anything from customer sentiment to some of the current experiences that they're experiencing to even if we're asking them questions like what Vicente just answered. I'd love to hear some of the findings that you guys are seeing.
Yeah, so what Vicente was talking about and your question to him about machine monitoring and automation and all that sort of stuff, we have we call it a top shop survey. It's benchmarking of all kinds of facilities, but the one we've been working on the longest is machine shops. And last year I did a video with one of our editors, Pete Zielinski, about, he wrote a column about unattended machining and what we were seeing there. And I pointed out to him, boy, there's some really interesting data in our Top Shop survey. And there's kind of a progression that you see shops go through. And the first thing you see shops do is they put in place some sort of improvement methodology, right? And shops that have an improvement methodology versus those that don't have a slightly higher profit margin, 2 to 3 percentage points higher in profit margin. And then the next thing they do is go to unattended machining. It's very difficult to do unattended machining if you don't have some sort of continuous improvement process and you're really monitoring the system, kind of, even if it's just a manual monitoring, right, and all that sort of stuff. It's hard to do unattended machining. But if you have an improvement methodology and get a couple percentage points more profit, and you add unattended machining on top of that, you get another couple percentage points of profit versus somebody who's not doing those things. And then we really saw the third layer of that was getting into machine monitoring systems and software that, right, once you've done the first two of an improvement methodology and going unattended, well, how am I taking all that data from when nobody's there and monitoring the system when nobody's there? I need some way to do that to really kind of close the loop on the manufacturing process. And you see the shops that have implemented all three of those, right, their profit margin jumps up even more. And if we're talking about supply chain coming back to the US and manufacturing coming back to the US, being able to do that efficiently with a relatively unchanging workforce. I mean, we're not going to be adding lots of people in discrete parts and durable goods manufacturing because the supply chain is coming back. You have to do it more efficiently and with automation. And so all three of those things and that sort of step in the process there, and you can't jump to one without having done the previous one. So if you just try to implement machine monitoring we saw in our data without really doing unattended machining and without doing improvement methodologies in your plant, you're getting out of order, and it becomes hard to realize the profitability improvements of that. So there's a real process for manufacturers to go through in that. And we've got data on 2,500 shops to kind of show that really is how you need to step through this and think through it logically.
Yeah, we call that in our experience been the kind of the analytics journey. And it's interesting to hear that it's reflected also in your experience, and I'm also super interested in getting a lot of comments on this as well.
Yeah, actually, if I could just add to that, because there's also a question around what the data that I displayed and what percentage of those machines are automated. And we are capturing to a large percentage of the machines that we connect to, like how the material is fed in the machines and if they can be run unattended. Data is not perfect, but what we see is around a third of the machines that we connect to are manual. So operator needs to be there. I don't think we can quite say, I'm chatting with my data scientist if we could say that the 2/3 are automated because there's a percentage of them that are unknown. But just to give you a sense of the data set that we're showing, and of course, and I agree with you, Steve, that having machines that bar-fed lathes or palletized mills, or like coil-fed fabrication machines. I mean, there's really you really want to look at being able to run that machine without an operator standing right next to that machine 100% of the time. And I would say in my observations that a lot of our customers have a large percentage of those machines that are automated, but then there's some that are manual, and that's what I've seen, anecdotally across our customers.
Interesting. A question for the audience. We'll even start with Bill Barian on this one. We're hearing about certain government opportunities to provide incentives to the industry, and so on and so forth. For you, what would and everyone, what would your recommendations be? How do you see an ability to kind of prop up the industry right now? What type of things do manufacturers need? Where do they need support? What can kind of like a, and we don't take any political stances here, more just on the practical side, what can we do to best support the industry right now as a country?
For my part, personally, I believe that a big gap that we have nationally is in the upskilling of our workforce, upskilling of the workforce. That we are still in this model from the 20th century of a sort of industrial education type model of, in essence, saying that what individuals learn from birth through age 25 is supposed to last them, the rest of their life. And the reality is it doesn't. And yet on the skilled workforce, machining, manufacturing, advanced manufacturing side, we do not have a good mechanism for, companies to find the right training to upskill their employees. And you got the big ones, the GEs of the world, who they can afford to have their own in-house training. But for small, medium-sized manufacturers, it is very burdensome to upskill someone. You're taking someone off the line that needs to be trained, but you're also taking someone off the, from their daily job that needs to be doing the training. Very suboptimal. So, not that I'm looking to government to solve it, but they need to be part of the solution in trying to restructure our, let's just say, post 25-year-old technical education system so that it is more responsive to industry. In a lot of cases, industry is willing to pay for it, but you still have the education sort of structure, closely aligned with the government, and again, not, in my view, not responsive enough to industry or people's lifelong technical learning needs. So maybe not the answer you're expecting, but thought I'd offer that.
No, that was a great answer, honestly. I thought that was especially insightful. And that's something, I think that's, I was fortunate to attend, a World Economic Forum conference with McKinsey in New York a month or two ago, and that was the primary theme was upskilling workforce. Even if you have automation technology, you've got all the future abilities to automate factories. You still need the implementation, right? And people and the culture of implementation of these technologies are equally important as is the technology itself. Vicente, I'd love to hear your take on that. Get a company that we knows obviously, a lot of employees and implemented a lot of technology.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Bill Barian. I think you have a point that also applies to our country. I mean, what I think one of the most important things that are happening is that we have a generation of people, a younger generation that assumes that a lot of the collaboration tools, a lot of the software that is out there, a lot of the tools that we have out there, I mean, a lot of people, at least in our company, usually assumes that they are out there and that everybody knows how to use it. And but what I mean is that in our education system, we lack the exposure to the technology that is actually being used right now. And I think in our education system here at Mexico, we lack a lot of skills that eventually companies require from people. And I mean, even graduating right now is impossible. I mean, we have people that we're waiting for their diplomas, that we're waiting to finalize some of their education processes, and they cannot do it because they require some physical processes that shouldn't even be physical. I mean, they could be done electronically. So I think that right now, a lot of the official procedures that could help uh, people upgrade their skills and to show that they already have some skills, like like taking online courses, that we have a lot of resources available. And I mean, and by a lot of resources, I mean a ton of resources of courses that are available right now for free, courses from a lot of pages, and a lot of information that is right now out there. And at least here in Mexico, we do not have a way to make that official and to make that something that has weight for the companies to actually validate that people have those skills and to track down what skills they lack, what skills they need. So I think, yeah, I couldn't think of something more important right now than it is to establish the correct structure for how the people are going to learn, how people are going to validate those skills, how that is going to like impact the way they are being compensated, and eventually how, well, I mean, in parallel, how they're going to apply that knowledge to the challenges that we're facing right now. So yeah, I couldn't agree more with how we're going to structure that skill building system, and how is that going to make, maybe we're going to make that something that is validated internationally, and that can help us right now in some times in which in times in which people from each country can collaborate and we can build a lot of things together without having to cross borders. I mean, borders do not exist online, and it is just a matter of us bringing knowledge together and building things from that.
That's interesting sentiment. Clearly, comes across through the whole panel. Almost like our theme is acceleration of certain transformation. One hopes that from this we see some of those accelerants, specifically in workforce training. I had a conversation with a sales team from a completely different organization, and just with undeniable impact to be had on sales, right? And, their solution was not to try to pivot into another business, but was instead to take the time to double down on skills. I think that's quite interesting. A question that I've gotten a couple times, and this is an interesting one. Have any of you, had you really planned for this type of extreme disruption? I know that every company kind of has like scenario plans and best cases and worst cases. Individually, and did you have a plan in place for a disruption of this magnitude? And it's also okay if not. Want to start with maybe Bill, and then work our way around?
Sure. I'd say, just very quickly, so we're ISO 9001 certified, and hopefully by July we're AS 9100 certified. And so both of those quality management systems, you're doing risk analysis, you are doing risk reduction, and you are looking for points of failure, and you pair that nicely with a continuous improvement program, and it is really all about how do you mitigate risks. Now, no one really anticipated this coming along, but I'll tell you, if we hadn't, going back to a little earlier comment, if we had not been making investments in automation, in Industry 4.0, in a variety of those things that are increasing people's capability, at the same time increasing their impact, then it would be, you know, potentially a very different world now and an even more different world, you know, in coming weeks. So, Graham, on that point, if we get a chance before we end, just to talk about some short-term and long-term impacts, would love to weave that in, because share some thoughts. But go ahead. I think you're on mute.
Finally, I knew that was going to happen sooner or later. And Bill, I mean, that was literally my next question on there. Is like, you know, so short-term, long-term impacts. Starting with Bill, you know, take it away.
You know, okay, so short-term impact, you know, we've got to realize that the virus gets a vote, and we need to pivot as an industry, you know, with a bias for action. So I guess my message to, you know, when we're talking about, you know, ventilators and sourcing equipment, I mean, we're entertaining, we're getting through our shop right now, you know, 5 emergency POs for ventilator parts. It came in Friday. They need to get to the customer by this coming Friday. And in there's a message to sourcing managers, which is, you know, those who are buying critical components where they are seeing anything greater than a 2-week lead time for what they need, they've got to relook at that item, got to requote it out. There are, you know, all of these manufacturers across the U.S. who can jump on that just immediately. I mean, the technology is there for, you know, rapid turnaround. We received that PO Friday afternoon. By Sunday morning, we had the parts programmed. We had them setting up in the machines. We're just waiting for material to show up, you know, Monday and Tuesday, you know, ground and polished. And that is such a capability with, you know, with automation, with Industry 4.0 across industry, that sourcing managers need to look there. And if they need to use industry trade groups as the, you know, the megaphones for their sourcing needs, you know, whether it's the plastics industry trade group or the precision machine parts or whatever it is, use those trade groups and say, look, I've got a longer lead time than 2 weeks on this part. How can your industry trade group help me? How can your membership help me? And, you know, as we look long-term, I think this whole Asia supply chain, you know, going back to earlier comments, that is going to get completely upended, because the reality is industry in the U.S. can supply complexity or simplicity at volume, you know, with you know, automation and the, you know, honestly, the monitoring that, you know, MachineMetrics has revealed to us of, you know, we thought we were at like 55%, 60% capacity or utilization, but the reality is we're like 35%. And if you use those kind of tools to squeeze your white space, you know, get things turned around quicker, use it as data to drive continuous improvement projects, you know, I think that really long-term, we have the potential for the U.S., you know, and I'd like to think about the upper Midwest here being the factory floor of the world. So I'll just sort of leave with those points that I wanted to make sure inserting here. Challenge in the short term, opportunity in the long term.
Wow, thank you, Bill. That was awesome. I think this is a great kind of like last area for us all to talk. So I'd love to hear each panelist's opinion on this. Steve, would you care to take on the short and long-term impact that you see?
Sure. You know, obviously I look at it from a bigger industry perspective and sort of an economic perspective, because that's what I do. Short term, right? I mean, manufacturing is no different than any other industry really in the short term, that for the next month or two, the one thing that is going to be on everybody's mind is cash flow. Right? I need some way to manage cash flow, to have cash flow, right? And regardless of what how we're mitigating the effects of the virus through social distancing or whatever policies we're putting in place and whatever anybody is doing, getting through the short-term effects of a cash flow crunch for people, regardless of what industry you're serving, is eventually going to be the challenge. Right? Yes, if you're making medical parts right now, and for certain key things and critical things, you're going to be running your business like crazy, right? But outside of that, without cash flow moving through the economy, things just begin to slowly grind down. And if you think about manufacturing, which we've sort of talked about, not having a lot of effects to production and capacity right now, that's because manufacturing tends to be at the tail end of the economy, but eventually the lack of consumer spending and everything begins to spread through. So we have to get through that in whatever way everybody decides we're going to get through that. Longer term, though, I agree with Bill and the other things that have been said here, that I think there's a huge opportunity for manufacturing. And the way I look at it, and the things that are going to be critical is sort of what Bill pointed out, and what I know I've heard from MachineMetrics, right, is that shops tend to have way more underused machine capacity than they realize, right? We think we're at 60% or 70% or whatever capacity utilization, but we're actually at 25 or 30 once we really get the real data off of the machine. And so the challenge then to me for manufacturing here moving forward is not really getting more out of the machine because you've got so much capacity on the machine. The challenge is figuring out, how do I get the people more productive with the technology that I already have? That's the challenge. And when we look at our data from our Top Shop survey, the thing that is a predictor of profit margin in machine shops is not the revenue per machine, it's the revenue per employee. That's the predictor of profit margin. So it's how much can I drive through the employees? Because you spend 5 to 10 times on your employees that you spend on your machine tools, right? And if you've got 60 to 70% unused capacity on your machines, how do I organize my business in a way to get the maximum out of the employees through continuous improvement processes and Kaizen and all the other sort of stuff that people are doing? That's the thing that manufacturers really should be focusing on as we begin to see the supply chain start shifting back. How do I leverage the employees? And it's obviously a mix of those things. You need good machine tool technology and good automation, but you need the employees that can work with it and make use of it too.
Yeah, great. Really appreciate those thoughts. I just want to make one quick comment. Despite having a number of people still here, still watching, we have hit the top of the hour mark. I want to give Bill and Vicente their chance to answer this question. Also, I also completely understand if anyone needs to leave, or any panelists have to leave for that matter. We're super grateful for their time. But with that said, for those people, we have well over 100 people still watching. If Bill and Vicente, if you guys would like to one by one kind of give us your last thoughts, and then we can we'll kind of close this out for this first of what we're hoping to be many panels over the coming months on data and impact of this virus on manufacturing.
Yeah, I'll just really quick. For what I see is that we see a short-term drop due to the shutdowns, but I think that there's a medium-term general suppression of the economy, which is going to impact most industries. And then hopefully, as we've talked about here, bringing some of the supply chain, domesticating the supply chain will actually at least bring manufacturing back and even stronger. I mean, that's my hope. It's not my forecast. It's just what I'd like to see actually happen. And we have the reality, and then some of the early signs. But I'll leave it at that. And
yeah, Bill, thanks so much for your time. I know you got an appointment. I'm very thankful that you were here. I'll give Vicente a chance. Feel free, again, if anybody does have to log off, not a problem. Vicente, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, just so not to make it longer than it should take. I think the clearest point is that right now we need to, get out of the initial challenges that we are facing. I mean, we're facing a lot of things right now. Once we get past through that, because I don't think that there's much to say about the initial challenges that we are facing right now. I mean, I'm sure we are all keep discovering one after another through these days, but I'm sure that we will get past through them. I think that eventually we will realize that at least here at the Mexican manufacturing industry, I think that a lot of people, including us, thought that we had hit some kind of ceiling in terms of utilization from the machines, in terms of the efficiency of our processes. I think that through the years we had pictured this kind of peak in which we were, and I think that there's going to be a progressive event of discovering that we can do a lot more with a lot less, that we can empower our people to do more, that we can teach a lot more skills to our people. I think that we're going to realize that across the world we are not only stronger than we thought we were, but that we are capable of so much more. So I think that the challenge that will come is how are we going to go from a lot of like small dreams from IoT, from 4.0, from a lot of initiatives that were kind of like toys for a lot of companies that we have seen here in Mexico, to actually land a good project, to land an initiative that lasts through the years. And that, I mean, I think we are past through that age of like playing with the options that we have. And now it's the time to do something really about it in a lot of levels. I mean, that will drastically change, and I think will fundamentally change the way the manufacturing industry sees all the employees, all how we prepare them, how they work for us, how we compensate them. I think it will drastically change things, but that we will see that through this and probably the next years to come.
Yeah, and again, firstly, I just want to thank everybody so much. I want to thank our panelists for their time. Obviously everybody's it's quite a time we're all living through today, and we appreciate their generosity to lend their insights and opinions and thoughts to us. So thank you so much to Bill, to Vicente, to Steve for joining us. This will be, again, just the first of a number of webinars we'll be doing over the next couple months related to data in the time of coronavirus. I've got a number of great topics from this, including retooling workforce, the future, redistribution of supply chain. And I think that, bringing people together to discuss these things, there is really no better time right now than training, right, and learning and education. So I am really thankful. I will tell you all, the number one question that was asked was, what type of dog do you have, Vicente? Everyone seems really interested. And so
he's a stray dog, actually. Well, a former stray dog. So
well, fortunately my cat did not make an appearance. Thank you guys again so much. Really appreciate it. Everybody will get a recording of this after. Thanks again to our panelists, and everybody stay safe, and until next time.
Thanks, Graham.
Great.